Hey everybody, it's Brooke, and I am coming to you to give my presentation on the dissertation that I read for the assignment. The dissertation that I read was written by Lauren Kane, actually a student from the University of Alabama. Graduated in 2018, or she submitted her dissertation in 2018. And just the overall review of this, the abstract is that she wrote her dissertation, The Influence of Communities of Practice on Community College and a Nurse Educator Identity. So she went and interviewed 11 community college educators with 3 years of experience or more to ask them their struggles, the weaknesses, the downfalls of the institution that they were involved in, and any lack of mentoring that they didn't have, and how that affected their identity as a professional nurse educator versus just their identity as a nurse. So the dissertation was trying to look at how nurse educators teaching in a community college find their professional identity. And that's still something that is to be determined. There's actually a task force working in the NLN that is just set to help nurse educators find their professional identity. So it is a big thing in the literature right now. But the professional identity was also seen to be closely linked to their personal identity and how their careers affect both of those in the professional setting and in their personal mission with their careers. So by looking at the community of practice, they see how this fosters the professional identity information. The sooner that the nurse educator can find their identity, moving forward from the identity of a floor nurse to the identity of a professional nurse educator, then there is an increase in their satisfaction in their job and in their role as an educator, which will promote longevity of their career and decrease on faculty turnover. So the population that Dr. Kane focused on was the community college nurse faculty because that was the setting that she was from. And so that was her inclusion. One of her inclusion criteria was that they were community college nurse educators, 3 years of experience or more. So they were out of that novice level and they were trying to decide, how that their identity was continuing to be shaped beyond that 3 years. Her statement purpose was the purpose of this study was to explore how community college nurse educators make meaning of and construct professional identity within communities of practice. Dr. Kane had 86 references in her study, and she organized and designed her review of literature very well. She broke it down and went through the different kind of definitions of her study. So she went through and kind of reviewed the literature grouped with professional identity, the role of a nurse educator, and then one of her other definitions that she used was symbolic interactionism, and that was actually her framework, but she did use part of her nursing literature to go over and explain what that meant. So I thought she organized it really well. I thought that the literature that she provided was pertinent to her study, and it made sense. It really gave an added layer of professionalism and detail so that anyone reading this study would know exactly what she was talking about because she defined and organized it really well. She also did a nice job of showing the gap in literature. So she did state that there was a gap in literature for a need to continue to research the specific problems that nurse educators have and also pay closer attention to the group, the population of the community college nurse educators. In her study, she did say that that was a different population. They looked at nursing differently. They dealt with students differently. I agreed to some extent with her on that and their opinions, and then I differed as well because I've taught in both settings, and I could definitely confirm some of her thoughts, but then others I thought was a little skewed. So the conceptual framework she used was symbolic interactionism. I'd never heard of this framework. It was new to me, but I do see how this could possibly be a framework that I could use moving forward, helping novice nurse educators, and how this affected them as they were able to determine their professional identity. So the definition of symbolic interactionism is a constructivist perspective of how people engage with meaning making. And there's three component or core principles that help make meaning into their identity: meaning, language, and thought. So the meaning is derived from our interactions and interpretations of the world around us. So for novice nurse educators, that would be your students, your faculty, administration, things like that that would help you to identify yourself uh, with your identity with a nurse educator. The language is symbolic of the meaning that are constructed as we interact with the world. And then the thought is the process with which we reflect on our previous experiences. So this all made sense in regards to this, because as nurses, we have an identity as a floor nurse, and we went through nursing school. We've become experts in our fields on the floor or in practice, and then that all makes meaning in your professional identity. Then you're taken out of that world of nursing, and you're put into a world of education, and you don't really have any previous experience to grow off of. So then you're mainly focusing on the meaning and the language around you to help you develop a new identity. So she used that to examine how community college nurse educators think about professional identity and how they make meaning of their identities and how they engage with their community of practice around them. So her research questions were two questions. Number one is, what is the meaning of professional identity to community college nurse educators? And number two is, how do community college nurse educators construct a professional identity within their communities of practice? So the methodology is traditional qualitative design. The study was conducted using purposeful selection. So she handpicked who she wanted, and obviously they consented to the study because she wanted to focus on community college nurse educators. The participants were full-time nursing faculty employed at an accredited community college in the South. The participants were all Caucasian females, and that was one of the limitations of her study that she went over later, is that she wished she could have had a more diverse population, but that was the only population of people that responded and agreed to the study. Um, the minimum requirement of education was a master's degree in the science of nursing and education and at least 3 years of teaching experience. They all had a variety of nursing backgrounds, so they weren't just educators. They were also involved in many other areas of nursing prior to education. The interviews were conducted over 2 months. They were all face to face, 45 minutes to an hour long, in neutral sites. And the data from the interviews were taken by Dr. Kane, and they were analyzed using in vivo coding, looking for major themes during the first cycle of coding. Her second cycle of coding was used, um, she used the symbolic interaction framework in order to look at the themes and make smaller themes, and we'll go over the ones was that she was able to put into categories from her first cycle of coding and then her second cycle of coding. So the limitations of her study, she said she had a small sample size, but was able to meet saturation with the information. She said she was actually able to meet saturation with 8 of them, but decided to go ahead and have the 11 complete the study because they had already agreed to it. She also said that the limitation was because they were all from the same region, they were all the same ethnicity, they were all the same gender. So if she could have had a more diverse study, I think it would have yielded more information, and maybe her saturation wouldn't have been met so early. So the interviews were also self-reports from the participants. So she said that it was kind of hard to validate what they were saying because it was in their own words. So truthfulness, she felt that they were all being truthful, but that one of the limitations of the study was that since it was a self-report, she wasn't able to verify if it was all truthful. So the findings from the study, there were 2 major themes. One of them was nurse education. The identity was, it's who I am and what I do. So it's focusing on the identity, the individual attributes of the identity. And then the second finding from the first coding was, we're all in this together. And so that focused on the group. So you had themes from individual identity, and then you had themes from how communities of practice affected their professional identity. So some of the sub themes in the first one, personal identity, was I'm a nurse first. I have dual identity, so we struggle with being a nurse and an educator. I'm well-rounded. I promote student success, and I focus on my community. And then the sub themes for the communities of practice is that we work as a team, we share knowledge, speak the same language, develop their practice, and work as a community of educators in order to grow and become nurse educators. So the significance of the study was the first was to address the serious faculty shortage that's in the forefront of all nursing programs, trying to admit more students so that we can help with the nursing shortage. But then there's a lack of faculty because there's high turnover, there's low pay, you work a lot for a little bit of money, little bit of recognition. But also, one of the issues was a lack of mentoring, a lack of direction, a lack of professional identity, and just feeling kind of lost. So, a lot of faculty members leave and go back to practice or continue on in their education and become nurse practitioners. Another one was that community colleges are responsible for graduating 56.6% of new nurses in America every year. And so when you have community college educators who are teaching in areas that are not their specialties, they have a wide variety of classes that they're teaching, and they're overworked, they're underpaid, they're under-respected because of the community college setting. And so this was a good study that was trying to help them figure out their professional identity in order for them to increase their role satisfaction and increase their retention. The third of significance of the study was understanding the professional identity in community college nurse educators and how that could lead to the development of strategies aimed at better supporting the community college nurse faculty, and how they transition from a practicing role to an education role. So I don't think that's a problem that is just siloed in community college. Having worked with novice faculty members coming straight from practice into education with no experience, I feel like this is the same issue. And so I really enjoyed reading her study because it went right along with the the idea and the topic of mentoring new novice nurse faculty members in a BSN role, coming straight from practice into an education role. So I think the problems are across the board the same. She just focused on this population. So the conclusion is that there is a connection between professional identity and nurse educator retention. The sooner we get their identity, help them discover who they are as an educator, the longer they'll stay in the role. Nurse educators constructing their professional identity is not an endless struggle. So there is an end to trying to figure that out. All of the people that were interviewed for this study taught longer than 3 years, so they weren't considered novice anymore, and they had all figured out who they were as a professional educator. So helping people find that sooner may help with their retention. Part of the defining process of the nurse educator professional identity is helping them discover who they are as an educator and how they want to educate. Helping them do that with a mentor or a guide or some type of guidance will help them hopefully find this earlier, and they won't feel so lost and dissatisfied. And the last one is the communities of practice have a positive influence on the construction of nurse educator professional identity. So as they come into these roles, helping them to find a group of people that can help them find their identity and have that community of practice to encourage them, motivate them, guide them. It does have a positive impact, and hopefully it will help these educators stay in their roles longer to be able to admit more nurses and hopefully help with the nursing shortage. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing from your feedback and looking at everybody else's presentations. Have a great summer.